Welcome to our deep dive into how the Kennedy family evolved from Irish Catholic new money outsiders to an old money American dynasty, rivaling the country's most elite circles. In this video, we'll explore the financial genius of Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., from his early days as the youngest bank president in the United States to his canny dealings in Hollywood, the liquor industry, and prime real estate acquisitions like the Merchandise Mart in Chicago. You'll see how his collaborations with figures like Franklin D. Roosevelt, coupled with meticulously crafted trust funds, laid the groundwork for his children, particularly John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Edward Ted Kennedy, to ascend to the highest echelons of U.S. politics. Along the way, we'll step inside the family's storied mansions in Palm Beach and Hyannisport and learn how Kennedy women such as Rose, Jackie, and Eunice helped shape an enduring legacy. Whether you're a history buff or just curious about the mysteries of American high society, this behind-the-scenes look reveals how the Kennedys wielded wealth, influence, and strategic alliances to transform new money beginnings into a legendary dynasty. How the Kennedys went from new money to old money. Let's begin with a vivid picture. Close your eyes and imagine a time in early 20th century America when Boston streets were alive with opportunity, where families of Irish Catholic descent sought influence in a society still dominated by old-line Protestant circles. Into this landscape stepped the ambitious Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., born in 1888 to Patrick Joseph Kennedy, a successful saloon owner who had risen to local political prominence. Patrick was no ordinary barkeep. According to contemporary accounts reported in the Boston Globe, he was influential enough to shape the political environment of his ward, giving young Joseph more than just a comfortable start. He offered him a taste of what it meant to move among people who held real power. Yet Joseph Sr. would far surpass his father's accomplishments by combining innate financial genius, unwavering determination, and strategic partnerships that propelled the family to the pinnacle of American political and social life. The trajectory of the Kennedys, rising from so-called new money status to become an old money dynasty revered in the same breath as the Rockefellers and Vanderbilts, stands as one of the most captivating tales in modern U.S. history. Stories about Joseph Sr.'s early brilliance abound. One anecdote, sometimes cited in business blogs and partially echoed by financial historians like John Steele Gordon, suggests that Joseph Sr. possessed an uncanny ability to read market shifts before most of his contemporaries. After graduating from Harvard in 1912, he first took on a role as a state bank examiner. That position gave him invaluable insights into the financial health of various institutions at a time when local banks rose and fell with startling speed. By the time he was only 25, Joseph Sr. had become the youngest bank president in America, heading Columbia Trust in Boston. This achievement was no small feat, especially in an era when bank presidents were typically older, well-established men, often from families entrenched in banking for generations. Yet Joseph Sr. didn't simply settle for a title. He used this position to deepen his understanding of stock valuations, corporate debt structures, and, more importantly, the psychology of investors. Here's where the story gets particularly fascinating. In the 1920s, as the stock market soared, Joseph Sr. embraced the spirit of the Roaring Twenties and engaged in speculative investments that turned him into a millionaire many times over. He is frequently noted for short selling before the 1929 market crash, one of the few who capitalized on the collapse. Although some historians debate exactly how early he exited the market, Fortune magazine, in a retrospective piece decades later, underscored that Joseph Sr. emerged from the crash not just unscathed, but significantly richer. He made what contemporary observers might call a contrarian move, selling off positions when everyone else was eagerly buying. By the time the dust settled, countless investors had been wiped out, but Joseph Sr.'s fortune was cemented, giving him the kind of financial padding that would support ever more ambitious ventures in Hollywood, real estate, liquor imports, and beyond. In Hollywood, Joseph Sr. showcased a flair for reorganizing faltering studios and merging them into formidable entities. During the late 1920s and early 1930s, the movie industry was undergoing seismic changes. The introduction of talkies revolutionized film production, and many studios struggled to adapt. Joseph Sr., seeing an opportunity, helped restructure several studios into what became known as RKO, Radio Keith Orpheum. According to material in film history archives, including references found in the Margaret Herrick Library of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences, Joseph Sr. walked away from his Hollywood ventures with around $5 million. At that time, the figure was astronomical, essentially positioning him on a financial tier well beyond typical movie producers of the day. His timing was again impeccable, tapping into the transition from silent films to sound films, all while forging lucrative distribution deals that guaranteed him hefty profits regardless of box office fluctuations. But Joseph Sr. was no mere movie mogul. When Prohibition ended in 1933, the country was thirsty, both literally and figuratively, for legally available spirits. The liquor industry was wide open territory, and Joseph Sr. astutely acquired exclusive U.S. import rights for Dewar's Scotch and Gordon's gin through his company, Somerset Importers. By the time he sold this franchise in 1946, he had pocketed $8.2 million, a sum that the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics inflation calculators, as well as data cited by the New York Times in retrospective articles, suggest would equate to over $150 million in today's money. These liquor import deals solidified his reputation as a shrewd negotiator. Multiple news outlets of the era, including the Wall Street Journal, marveled at his ability to secure such key brands, proof of his increasing influence in industries that spanned coast to coast. Then there was the realm of real estate, another cornerstone of the Kennedy fortune. Not content to rest on lucrative stock market and Hollywood gains, Joseph Sr. poured substantial resources into prime properties. One of his notable acquisitions was an interest in the Hialeah Park racetrack, located not in New York, but in Florida, though it was often mentioned in connection with New York investors. He also targeted the Merchandise Mart in Chicago, which, upon his purchase in 1945 for $12.5 million, was reputedly the largest commercial building in the world. Standing near the intersection of the Chicago River's branches, the Merchandise Mart boasted millions of square feet of floor space and housed an array of wholesale showrooms and offices. Local newspapers, including the Chicago Tribune, covered the sale extensively, pointing out that Joseph Sr.'s willingness to acquire such a gargantuan and complex piece of real estate signaled an investor unafraid of big bets. By 1957, Fortune magazine estimated his net worth at somewhere between $200 million and $400 million, placing him among the 15 wealthiest individuals in the United States. In a single generation, the Kennedys had gone from modestly affluent Irish Catholic Bostonians to one of the country's leading financial powerhouses. Yet Joseph Sr. detested ostentatious displays of wealth, something that might seem ironic given his monumental success. His style was the antithesis of the stereotypical new money tycoon who flaunted wealth through gaudy mansions or glittery social events. Instead, Joseph Sr. focused his energy on political influence. This is where the Kennedys diverged sharply from many other families who rose during the same era. While he did own luxurious properties in places like Palm Beach and Cape Cod, He preferred to channel his resources into carefully cultivated relationships with key political figures. One of his pivotal alliances was with Franklin D. Roosevelt, a fellow Harvard man. Their shared alma mater wasn't just a talking point at cocktail parties. It provided a sense of camaraderie and mutual respect. FDR recognized Joseph Sr.'s financial acumen and, in 1934, appointed him chairman of the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Historians have pointed out how Joseph Sr. helped reform certain Wall Street practices that had contributed to the reckless speculation of the 1920s, although cynics noted the irony that a one-time short seller presided over rules meant to curtail stock manipulation. Nevertheless, his tenure, lasting until 1935, signaled the deep trust that President Roosevelt placed in his judgment. Joseph Sr. also served as U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom from 1938 to 1940, though his controversial isolationist positions and sometimes pessimistic public statements about the war in Europe eventually led to tensions with Roosevelt. British newspapers like the Times of London criticized him, suggesting that his stance did not align with the urgency they felt in facing Nazi Germany. Nonetheless, this role offered the Kennedys unparalleled exposure on the global political stage, aligning them closer with America's upper crust circles that had historically been dominated by WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant elites. Through these posts, Joseph Sr. effectively bridged the gap between his Irish Catholic roots and the socially exclusive enclaves of the American establishment. This transformation or metamorphosis wasn't just about money. It was also about acceptance, status, and most crucially, power. To ensure his descendants would benefit from the wealth and influence he'd cultivated, Joseph Sr. set up trust funds in 1926, 1936, and 1949. Each was designed to distribute resources among his 9 children and eventually his 28 grandchildren. Rather than simply handing out cash, these structures allowed for a carefully managed transfer of assets, insulating the family from poor financial decisions and ensuring that capital could be reinvested to grow over generations. Legal analysts writing in the New York Times decades later would point out that these trusts exemplified how wealthy families transitioned into old money status by establishing continuity and long-term financial security. By the time Joseph Sr. stepped out of the public spotlight, the Kennedys were no longer upstart newcomers. They were recognized as a clan with dynastic ambitions, complete with the resources and connections to back them up. This shift fully crystallized in the public eye thanks to Joseph Sr.'s sons, John F. Kennedy, JFK, Robert F. Kennedy, RFK, and Edward Ted Kennedy. All of them attended Harvard, maintaining the family tradition, and they embodied a certain refinement and commitment to public service that captured the American imagination. JFK, of course, soared to prominence during the 1960 presidential election, narrowly defeating Richard Nixon by a margin of 0.17% in the popular vote. The Boston Globe, on the night of the election, proclaimed a Kennedy Revolution, highlighting how an Irish Catholic from Massachusetts had achieved the highest office in the land. This was momentous on several levels. Not only was JFK the first Catholic president, but his victory also signaled the coming of age of a new generation of American leadership. Inside the Kennedy mansions, the Hyannisport compound in Cape Cod, Massachusetts, is arguably the most iconic of all Kennedy properties. Purchased by Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. in 1928 for $25,000, a sum that already indicated significant means, though not the astronomical figures the family would later wield. The property spanned 6 acres of prime waterfront on Nantucket Sound. According to the local Cape Cod Times, this stretch of coastline was then becoming a magnet for wealthy Bostonians seeking a summer retreat, but Joseph Sr. envisioned more than just a seasonal getaway. He saw a space where the Kennedys could congregate, strategize, relax, and cement their emergent status as a formidable clan. The main house, boasting 13 bedrooms, became the nucleus of family gatherings. 2 guest houses dotted the perimeter for adult children and visitors. A private beach offered the luxury of seclusion, something vital for a family that would grow accustomed to the constant flash of reporters' cameras. By 1929, Joseph Sr. had commissioned architect Charles Lafrine to renovate the main house. This wasn't a matter of mere cosmetic changes. The intention was to make the place reflect the Kennedys' blend of practicality and quiet opulence. Clapboard exteriors, reminiscent of traditional New England homes, were chosen to maintain local architectural harmony and avoid ostentatious displays. Inside, oak-paneled walls lent a sense of warmth and gravitas, the kind of environment where children could play in the mornings and future presidents could confer with campaign advisors by afternoon. A tennis court, installed on the property, gave the estate a country club charm, and it soon became a focal point of both recreation and political networking. Members of Joseph Sr.'s expanding social circle, which included financiers, politicians, and Hollywood figures, often found themselves lured to Hyannisport for weekend get-togethers that mingled tennis matches with intense backdoor conversations about stock markets, election strategies, and national picture, yourself stepping into an era when families with the ambition and resources of the Kennedys were rapidly reshaping the American social landscape. Their ascendancy from modest roots into a status on par with the nation's traditional elites is a saga that has captivated historians, journalists, and the public for decades. While the family's political exploits often steal the spotlight, their residences, especially the personal estates and commercial properties, are equally telling of how they managed to blend their new money dynamism with the aura of old-world aristocracy. From the storied Hyannisport compound on Cape Cod to the warm breezes of Palm Beach, Florida, and on into the skyscraper canyons of Chicago and New York, each Kennedy property functioned as a deliberate extension of their brand. Understated yet undeniably grand, intimately functional yet globally symbolic. Licey. Fast forward to 1960, and the estate played a pivotal role in John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign. Reporters from the Boston Globe and Life magazine documented how JFK's headquarters took shape in this unassuming seaside setting. There, he prepared his speeches, strategized with his brother Robert F. Kennedy, and occasionally fielded questions from journalists who found Hyannisport simultaneously informal and majestic. When Hubert Humphrey made visits, the compound acquired even greater gravitas. It wasn't merely a backdrop, but a living symbol of a new American aristocracy. Young, forward-thinking, yet steeped in tradition. Over the decades, the compound's ownership shifted among family members, but the estate remained a treasured hub for reunions, holiday gatherings, and even philanthropic events. Today, real estate analysts value it at anywhere from $20 million to $30 million, a testament not only to its prime coastal location but also to the mystique that has grown around it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and other descendants have taken an active role in preserving the property, aware that every oak beam and blade of grass is steeped in national history as much as family lore. The Kennedys' second great residential acquisition was a 14,500 square foot Mediterranean revival villa in Palm Beach, Florida, purchased in 1933 for $100,000 roughly $2.3 million in today's money, according to inflation calculators. Palm Beach in the 1930s was already a haven for Northeastern elites eager to escape harsh winters and rub shoulders with luminaries of finance and society. The property, designed by Addison Misner, showcased all the hallmarks of his signature style: sweeping archways, stucco walls, barrel tile roofs, and ornate wrought iron accents. Misner's architectural influence in South Florida was vast. He was largely responsible for creating the Mediterranean-inspired aesthetic that would become emblematic of Palm Beach luxury. Local historians, such as those writing for the Palm Beach Post, often cite this particular estate as a near-perfect example of Misner's ability to merge a sense of fantasy with functional elegance. Joseph Sr. and his wife, Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, quickly recognized that the Palm Beach house was more than just a vacation spot. Its breezy patios and ocean views made it an ideal place to host influential figures. Winston Churchill reportedly visited in 1940, an event that occurred against the backdrop of intensifying global tensions in Europe. Although Joseph Sr.'s isolationist stance during his tenure as U.S. ambassador to the United Kingdom had stirred controversy, Churchill's presence at the villa reinforced the notion that the Kennedys were players on the international stage. During John F. Kennedy's presidency, the estate earned the moniker Winter White House, as official meetings sometimes took place there amid the lush tropical setting. JFK famously drafted part of his 1961 inaugural address on the veranda, aided by Florida's mild winter sunshine and the tranquil sound of ocean waves. Newspaper accounts from the Palm Beach Daily News recall the spectacle of Secret Service agents patrolling the ocean front while the president worked. Decades later, after the property changed hands, it sold in 1995 for $4.9 million, eventually skyrocketing to a $70 million valuation by 2015, a clear indication that the Kennedy aura had only magnified its appeal. While these two estates, Hyannisport and Palm Beach, often capture public imagination, the Kennedys also extended their real estate aspirations to large-scale commercial ventures, further blending financial acumen with political clout. The Merchandise Mart in Chicago is perhaps the most remarkable of these acquisitions. Purchased in 1945 for $12.5 million, the building was, at the time, hailed as the largest commercial structure in the world. Located along the Chicago River, this colossal architectural feat once had its own ZIP code due to its sheer size. Newspapers like the Chicago Tribune marveled that a single family could hold an asset so vast, housing showrooms for everything from furniture to apparel, alongside corporate offices and event spaces. By the 1970s, the Merchandise Mart was generating $13 million annually in rent, a figure cited in business magazines such as Forbes. When the building was sold in 1998 for $625 million, it represented a 2,000% return on the original investment, a deal that has since become a textbook example of long-term real estate strategy paying off handsomely. In New York, Joseph Sr. pursued a similarly shrewd path, acquiring a parcel on Lexington Avenue for $1.9 million in 1943 and selling it in 1963 for $6 million, more than tripling his investment over 2 decades. According to archived real estate records from the New York Times, the deal showcased Kennedy's knack for predicting which neighborhoods would experience growth and how to leverage that foresight. Rumors and partial documents indicate that Joseph Sr. may also have held a stake in the land underneath the Empire State Building, arguably the crown jewel of Manhattan skyscrapers, although the exact details of that arrangement remain a point of intrigue for many Kennedy aficionados. Even if the transaction details were somewhat opaque, the mere possibility that the Kennedys had a piece of such an iconic landmark served to underscore their arrival among America's financial elite. After all, real estate in Manhattan was, and remains, one of the most reliable barometers of both wealth and status. What makes these residential and commercial investments particularly notable is how seamlessly they dovetailed with the Kennedys' wider ambitions. In the early 20th century, many families who struck it rich focused solely on accumulating monetary capital or indulging in lavish displays. Joseph Sr., by contrast, held a deep belief in translating that wealth into institutional power. This conviction was evident in his decision to establish a series of trust funds, beginning in 1926, expanding in 1936, and again in 1949, that distributed resources among his children and later grandchildren. The properties, be they mansions in exclusive enclaves or vast commercial complexes in bustling cities, served both to bolster the Kennedys' financial foundation and to elevate them socially. By the time John F. Kennedy ran for president in 1960, it was not just about his personal charm and political skill. It was about a whole family apparatus that had been decades in the making, fortified by strategic real estate holdings that signaled both solidity and aspiration. For instance, when Life magazine ran photo features in the late 1950s, showing the Kennedys at Hyannisport, the images subtly conveyed a narrative of respectability and refined wealth, sailing, playing touch football on neatly trimmed lawns, entertaining foreign dignitaries in a manner reminiscent of a European noble house. In Palm Beach, the so-called Winter White House introduced an appealing glamour, pictures of President Kennedy in sunglasses by the pool or strolling barefoot along the beach presented a fresh, modern face of American power. These photos circulated through major media outlets at the time, including the New York Times and the Associated Press, shaping the public's perception of the Kennedys as a blend of accessibility and aristocratic allure. The estates themselves became characters in the Kennedy story, familiar backdrops that anchored everything from political campaigns to statecraft, as well as family tragedies and celebrations. The synergy between the residential estates and the commercial properties was also emblematic of the Kennedys' calculated approach. If Hyannisport signaled heritage, tradition, and a sense of belonging, the Merchandise Mart and New York parcels symbolize formidable economic clout. Media coverage, such as Fortune magazine's 1957 article estimating Joseph Sr.'s net worth at $200 to $400 million, hammered home the idea that the Kennedys were part of a newly emerging class of ultra-wealthy families who had catapulted themselves into the ranks once held by the Rockefellers, the Morgans, or the Astors. By focusing on real estate as a platform for both financial returns and societal influence, Joseph Sr. ensured that the Kennedys could pivot between the roles of quiet landlords, gracious hosts, and political kingmakers whenever they saw fit. Some expansions to the Palm Beach and Hyannisport estates over the years illustrate how the family adapted the properties to keep pace with their evolving roles. After Joseph Sr. suffered a stroke in the early 1960s, certain modifications were reportedly made to improve wheelchair accessibility and facilitate his continued enjoyment of the compound's amenities. Local carpenters from the Cape Cod area recall small but significant additions. Ramps, elevator chairs, integrated discreetly into the home's architecture so as not to disrupt its classic look. Even in moments of personal adversity, the properties symbolized resilience and continuity, hosting family gatherings and philanthropic events that reflected the Kennedys' broader commitment to both private bonding and public engagement. Likewise, the Winter White House in Palm Beach underwent various renovations under different owners after the Kennedys parted with it. When it sold for $4.9 million in 1995, real estate watchers commented that the price, while impressive, seemed low given the estate's storied history. By 2015, however, a combination of Palm Beach's rising property values and the enduring Kennedy mystique pushed the valuation to $70 million. Architectural historians who examine Misner's legacy argue that the home remains an important artifact of Palm Beach's golden age, with the Kennedy tenure just one facet of its storied past. Nevertheless, it's impossible to walk through its corridors or lounge by its pool without sensing the echoes of major historical figures conferring on matters of war, peace, and national policy. Beyond the high walls of the family's private estates, the Kennedys also recognized the significance of forging public spaces and memorials that would further entrench the family legacy. The John F. Kennedy Library and Museum in Boston, while not a residential property, stands as an outgrowth of the same mindset that propelled them to invest in iconic real estate in major cities. Overlooking the harbor, the library's designed by I.M. Pei merges an elegant modern aesthetic with a nod to Boston's maritime heritage. The institution draws thousands of visitors each year, many of whom leave with a deeper appreciation for the Kennedys' sense of duty, style, and civic responsibility. That blend of public homage and personal brand building is consistent with the family's approach to property ownership in Hyannisport, Palm Beach, Chicago, and New York. The result is that when we look inside the Kennedy mansions, as the phrase often goes, we're not just peering at decorative styles or square footage. We are stepping into microcosms of the American dream, as interpreted by a family determined to transmute wealth into a multi-generational dynasty. The clapboard walls and oak-paneled interiors at Hyannisport tell the story of a patriarch who thought well beyond his own lifetime. The Addison Misner arches and breezy patios in Palm Beach capture the Kennedys' flair for combining serious politics with leisurely indulgence. The soaring floors of the Merchandise Mart and the Manhattan parcels quietly accumulating value speak to a capacity for harnessing financial markets at their most dynamic. And underlying every brick and beam is an ethos. That influence in America demands not just money, but a sense of place, legacy, and identity woven into the nation's fabric. How the Kennedy women turned their family into old money. Imagine stepping into a grand salon in early 20th century Boston, where social status and old line prestige are tightly bound to which family you hail from, the clubs you frequent, and the charities you support. It was into this world, where Irish Catholics were still battling prejudice from the city's entrenched Protestant elite, that Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy emerged as a formidable figure. In 1914, she married Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., helping launch a family dynasty that would capture American imaginations for generations. While Joseph Sr. built the financial foundation, it was often the Kennedy women, their poise, philanthropy, social connections, and public image, that propelled the clan from new money upstarts into what some observers called America's royal family. Their contributions bridge the gap between an Irish Catholic immigrant past and an aristocratic future defined by Ivy League educations, philanthropic leadership, and political ambition. Rose Fitzgerald Kennedy, 1890 to 1995, led the way as the family's matriarch. Born into privilege, she was the daughter of John Honey Fitzgerald, a larger-than-life Boston mayor whose beaming grin and political savvy made him a local celebrity. From the beginning, Rose brought her own version of sophistication to the Kennedys. Raised in a prominent Catholic household, She studied at Manhattanville College, a prestigious institution in New York, then an academy before it became a college, where she was trained in literature, languages, and social etiquette. By all accounts, as documented in her memoir Times to Remember, she possessed a subtle but unwavering determination to ensure her children would stand confidently among Boston's upper crust and beyond. The Boston Globe, in various retrospectives, emphasizes that Rose was the bedrock upon which her children built their academic, social, and political identities. At a time when anti-Catholic sentiment lingered in many parts of the country, Rose's devout faith and charitable initiatives acted as a softening agent for the Kennedys' rough edges, especially regarding rumors around Joseph Sr.'s alleged bootlegging or his sharp-elbowed financial maneuvers. Indeed, Rose's close connections with the Archdiocese of Boston and her tireless fundraising for Catholic charities gave the Kennedys a moral authority that was not always easy for wealthy families to claim. She was known to attend multiple masses each day in her later years, her charitable giving ranging from local parish renovations to donations for medical research wove the Kennedys into the broader fabric of the city's philanthropic tradition. Newspaper articles from the New York Times and historical Catholic registers in Boston mention Rose's consistent involvement in organizing social events for the diocese, reinforcing the family's alignment with the region's influential religious community. It was no small thing either that her father's political background gave her a certain gravitas when she hosted dinners and receptions. Her children, most famously John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, and Edward Ted Kennedy, grew up in a world where discipline and ambition were the twin pillars of daily life, a structure Rose oversaw with a blend of sternness and love. While Joseph Sr. might have emphasized business ventures and political connections, Rose's role in selecting finishing schools for her daughters and ensuring top-tier educations for her sons at Harvard was crucial to polishing the Kennedys' public image. This wasn't solely about etiquette lessons or European travel, though the family did indulge in both, but about forging alliances in the most rarefied social circles. By the 1920s and 1930s, as wealthy Bostonians made their annual pilgrimages to fashionable resorts from Newport to the south of France, Rose insisted that her children learn how to walk into a room with confidence, speak fluent French or Italian, and cultivate friendships among other influential families. Her vantage point, shared in Times to Remember, underscored that these experiences were not frivolities. They were strategic building blocks for a family determined to transcend its outsider status as Irish Catholics. Rose's longevity was legendary. She lived to be 104, and her papal honor in 1974, which named her a Vatican Countess, was more than ceremonial. It signaled the Roman Catholic Church's recognition of her decades-long commitment to faith, philanthropy, and family unity. Local Boston media, along with international Catholic news outlets, covered the event, lauding Rose as a paragon of virtue and maternal fortitude. In so doing, they highlighted how her personal prestige shed a refined glow on the entire Kennedy clan, reinforcing their transition from a brash new money family to a venerable institution that could hold its own with the country's old money aristocrats. But Rose was not the only Kennedy woman who shaped the family's trajectory. Jump forward to 1953, when Jacqueline "Jackie" Lee Bouvier married John F. Kennedy. Jackie's background mirrored the Kennedys' ambitions. She hailed from the Bouvier family, which had its own cachet in old money Newport society. Educated at Vassar, then at the Sorbonne, Jackie had a cosmopolitan flair that meshed seamlessly with JFK's brimming political future. Her sense of style, Oleg Cassini gowns, Givenchy dresses, her iconic pillbox hats, became emblematic of a new wave of American elegance. Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and other fashion periodicals breathlessly covered her every outfit, elevating the family's profile far beyond conventional political circles. As First Lady, Jackie undertook what some historians regard as a high-profile rebranding of the White House. She invited in top designers, antique collectors, and historians to restore rooms that had become somewhat nondescript over the years. Jackie's televised tour of the renovated White House in 1962 was seen by 80 million viewers, an astronomical audience at the time. Newspapers like the Washington Post and Life magazine lavished praise on Jackie's taste, framing her approach as both steeped in American history and reminiscent of European royal households. That broadcast later won an Emmy, an almost unheard-of accolade for a First Lady, and it burnished the family's image on a national scale. By infusing the presidential residence with a sense of cultural heritage and refinement, Jackie helped distance the Kennedys from the rougher narratives of Joseph Sr.'s rumored dealings, and resituated them in the public eye as patrons of the arts and stewards of American tradition. Jackie's impact only intensified after JFK's assassination in 1963. The dignity she displayed while walking beside her husband's coffin, clad in a black veil, etched a haunting image in the collective American psyche. According to interviews collected by the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, her composure in those days of national mourning helped solidify the Kennedy name as one marked by both tragedy and timeless grace. Tabloid frenzy erupted years later when she married Aristotle Onassis, the shipping magnate reportedly worth $500 million or more. While some criticized the move, it also connected her, and by extension the broader Kennedy family, to international high society. Jackie's presence aboard Onassis's yachts and at glamorous events around Europe ensured that the Kennedy mystique transcended the American political sphere, placing it into an even broader global context. Greek tabloids, French newspapers like Le Monde, and British outlets such as the Daily Mail all documented her every appearance, further popularizing the notion of the Kennedys as a dynasty not limited by nationality. Meanwhile, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, 1921 to 2009, took a different approach to elevating the family name, philanthropy on a massive scale. Inspired by her sister Rosemary, who was intellectually disabled and had struggled to find appropriate social outlets, Eunice turned personal empathy into the global movement known as the Special Olympics. Founded in 1968, the organization began as a backyard summer camp in Rockville, Maryland, and expanded rapidly, buoyed by support from the Joseph P. Kennedy Jr. Foundation. Reputable sources such as the Special Olympics' own historical archives note how Eunice's relentless advocacy attracted volunteers and media coverage, culminating in the 2004 Olympics' first International Special Olympics Games at Chicago's Soldier Field in 1968. Even the Washington Post observed that while other wealthy families gave to charity, few were as hands-on or innovative as the Kennedys, who utilized their resources and influence to seed a program that has since served over 5 million athletes in more than 190 countries. Eunice's 1984 Presidential Medal of Freedom, awarded by President Ronald Reagan, underscored her massive contributions to social justice, raising the entire family's philanthropic stature to unprecedented levels. Those who might have once dismissed the Kennedys as mere opportunists or shallow showpieces now had to contend with a tangible legacy of service that fundamentally changed global perceptions of intellectual disability. Numerous articles, including coverage from Time and the New York Times, credited Eunice's initiative with helping to destigmatize mental and developmental disabilities, especially during a period when such topics were widely misunderstood. This tradition of public service carried through to the next generation of Kennedy women as well. Caroline Kennedy, born 1957, the daughter of JFK and Jackie, grew up under the intense scrutiny of the media. Nevertheless, she carved out her own path. After graduating from Harvard and Columbia Law School, Caroline authored books on constitutional law and privacy, some co-written with Ellen Alderman, and served on various boards. Her eventual entry into official public service as U.S. Ambassador to Japan, 2013 to 2017, and later to Australia from 2022, offered yet another layer to the family's transformation. The Associated Press and Reuters, among other international outlets, tracked her diplomatic approach, noting her focus on cultural exchange and historical reconciliation, particularly with Japan, given the painful backdrop of World War II. Her calm, gracious demeanor, combined with a knack for connecting on a personal level with officials abroad, reinforced the Kennedys' reputation for polished leadership. In interviews from her diplomatic posts, Caroline often referenced her mother's influence on cultivating grace under pressure and her grandmother Rose's emphasis on faith and public service. Such nods to family tradition endeared her further to those who still lionize the Camelot era. In 2013, Carolyn penned Rose Kennedy's Family Album, a memoir replete with photographs and reflections on her grandmother's life. The volume, widely reviewed in mainstream outlets like the Boston Globe and the Los Angeles Times, reminded the public that behind the glamour, the Kennedys prioritized strong bonds, education, and a philanthropic ethos that outlasted electoral cycles. This focus on continuity and elegance bridging multiple generations is precisely what cements the family's old money aura. Rather than dissipating wealth or fracturing under tabloid scrutiny, the Kennedy women harnessed public attention to highlight enduring legacies, from Rose's devout charity to Eunice's groundbreaking work with Special Olympics, from Jackie's cultural initiatives to Caroline's diplomatic finesse. Other notable Kennedy women also played parts in this ongoing narrative. Ethel Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy's widow, remained a highly visible figure in the fight for social justice, working on initiatives that range from civil rights advocacy to anti-poverty campaigns after her husband's assassination. Jean Kennedy Smith, another of JFK's sisters, served as U.S. Ambassador to Ireland, 1993 to 1998, where her efforts contributed to the Northern Ireland peace process. Her involvement was recognized by outlets like the Irish Times, which chronicled her close relationship with Irish politicians and community leaders. Each of these women, in her own capacity, upheld the idea that wealth and status came with moral obligations, a concept sometimes called noblesse oblige, which many older aristocratic families in Europe embraced, but was less common among America's fast-rising dynasties. What sets the Kennedy women apart is the balance they achieved between tradition and modernity. Rose was deeply rooted in Catholic and Bostonian conventions. Jackie infused mid-century America with European sophistication. Eunice brought forward-looking social reform. Carolyn stepped into international diplomacy at a time when few female ambassadors were in the public eye. Their combined efforts constructed an image that felt simultaneously classic and contemporary. It reassured the old guard that the Kennedys understood time-honored social codes while promising newer generations that the family was progressive and forward-thinking. John F. Kennedy Jr., the old money president that never was. If ever there were a child born into a realm of mythic proportions, It was John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr. The image of him playing at his father's feet in the Oval Office remains one of the most enduring snapshots of JFK's Camelot era. Papers from the Boston Globe to the New York Times recounted stories of a White House staff enamored with the boy's antics, even as the Cuban Missile Crisis and civil rights struggles occupied the very halls he was racing through. When President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22, 1963, the heartbreak was shared by a nation that had already fallen in love with the first family. Only 3 days later, John Jr. turned 3, famously saluting his father's casket in what historians now describe as one of the most poignant and widely circulated news images of the 20th century. For many Americans, it felt as though they had tragically lost both a president and the chance to see this little boy grow up in the White House. JFK Jr.'s mother, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy Onassis, took pains to shield him and his older sister Carolyn from the glare of relentless media scrutiny. She moved to New York, seeking a life where her children might gain some semblance of normalcy. By all accounts, reflected in numerous interviews and memoirs, including those from Jackie's confidants, she was determined her children would experience a balanced upbringing, despite the money and mystique swirling around them. John Jr. inherited a $10 million trust fund from his father, established shortly before JFK's death. Over time, that sum was supplemented by Jackie's estate, which the New York Times reported had ballooned in value due to savvy investments and the appreciation of real estate, further cementing John Jr.'s financial security. Thus, from childhood, he was the beneficiary of considerable wealth, carefully managed by trustees who had a mandate not only to preserve assets, but also to give him a runway to shape his own future. Education was paramount. John Jr. attended Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts, a boarding school steeped in tradition and known for molding future leaders. True to the Kennedy ethos, he didn't coast on his name. Teachers and peers often remarked on his earnest nature, an unpretentious attitude that stood out among his more privileged classmates. By the time he graduated and moved on to Brown University, rumors about John Jr.'s social life began circulating in the press, though most classmates later recalled him as friendly and likable, but certainly not the flamboyant party figure that tabloids made him out to be. He graduated from Brown in 1983 with a BA in American Studies and toyed with the idea of acting. He famously appeared in a comedic cameo at the 1985 MTV Video Music Awards, but soon realized that public fascination with his every move would make such a path difficult. Instead, his sense of service and intellectual curiosity led him toward the law. John Jr. enrolled at New York University School of Law, where he earned his JD in 1989. The journey wasn't without hiccups. He failed the New York bar exam twice before finally passing it in 1990, an experience that gave tabloids momentary fodder, but also underscored his dogged determination. Articles at the time in the Washington Post and the New York Daily News reflected a mixture of sympathy and schadenfreude, as the son of a famously gifted president struggled with an exam that thousands of less famous students had also found challenging. Upon passing, John Jr. joined the Manhattan District Attorney's Office as an assistant district attorney, serving from 1989 to 1993. As an ADA, he worked on cases ranging from petty theft to more serious crimes, earning a reputation, according to colleagues interviewed by outlets like the New York Times, for approachability, fairness, and a marked reluctance to leverage his family name. Yet, even in the courtroom, reporters sometimes lined the hallways to catch a glimpse of him, testifying to the enduring magnetism of the Kennedy mystique. The early to mid-1990s also saw John Jr. step into the rarefied circles of New York society. A fixture at charitable galas and cultural fundraisers, He mingled with celebrities, philanthropists, and power brokers who recognized the potential for a Kennedy resurgence in American politics. The same new money versus old money dichotomy that had once dogged his grandfather, Joseph P. Kennedy Sr., no longer applied to John Jr., who was considered a bona fide scion of an established dynasty. In 1988, People magazine dubbed him the sexiest man alive, a designation that propelled him onto the covers of countless publications. This sudden surge of media attention was a double-edged sword. It brought him pop culture status, but also stoked rumors about potential runs for office that he appeared, at the time, unready to embrace. By 1995, John Jr. co-founded George Magazine with his business partner Michael Berman. The glossy publication promised, and mostly delivered, a mix of politics, pop culture, and celebrity. Its tagline, "Not just politics as usual," hinted at John Jr.'s ambition to shake up a magazine market that usually kept politics and entertainment in separate spheres. The first issue, featuring Cindy Crawford on the cover dressed as George Washington, immediately generated buzz, with a print run that soared to around 400,000 copies at its peak circulation. Advertisements in the magazine catered to a young, affluent readership, including major luxury brands. Profiles on politicians often incorporated tongue-in-cheek humor or celebrity elements, capturing John Jr.'s attempt to demystify political processes for a broader audience. George's editorial slant was occasionally criticized for being light on serious policy analysis, yet it managed to carve a unique niche, a politics-centered lifestyle magazine that resembled Vanity Fair or GQ in style and flair. Interviews with John Jr. in the Washington Post and Time magazine around that era show him passionately defending the magazine's editorial approach, aiming to expand Democratic engagement by making politics seem less arcane and more akin to a dynamic, celebrity-driven narrative, akin to the world in which he himself had grown up. Unsurprisingly, speculation soon turned to the question of whether John Jr. would parlay his name recognition and wide popularity into a bid for political office. After all, the Kennedys had long been seen as a formidable political brand. His father was a beloved president, his uncles Robert and Ted had also served in high office, and cousins were active in state and federal legislatures. A 1997 Gallup poll found that 65% of Americans viewed him favorably for a potential Senate or gubernatorial run, numbers that would be the envy of most aspiring politicians. Senior journalists, including some at the New York Times, opined that if John Jr. decided to run for a New York Senate seat, he would be a serious contender from the moment he announced. The rumor mill went into overdrive in the late 1990s, especially when then First Lady Hillary Clinton appeared poised to seek the same Senate seat in New York. Could John Jr. challenge her? Might he aim for the governorship instead? So strong was the sense that John Jr. was biding his time that some tabloids even printed John F. Kennedy Jr. for president without irony. He addressed these speculations with politeness but also caution, famously telling Oprah Winfrey in a 1998 interview, "I want to contribute, but on my terms," signaling that he was neither rejecting nor fully embracing the idea of campaigning. Meanwhile, his personal life grabbed headlines just as fervently. Photographers dogged his every move, whether he was riding his bicycle through Central Park, attempting to blend into the Manhattan crowd in casual clothes, or stepping out with various dates. Then came Carolyn Bessette, a striking blonde who had worked in public relations for Calvin Klein. She caught John Jr.'s attention in the mid-1990s, and they began dating under the intense scrutiny of tabloids like the New York Post. Friends later recounted in interviews with Vanity Fair that the pair had an immediate chemistry, bonding over their shared desire for privacy amidst a sea of paparazzi. Their 1996 wedding on Cumberland Island, Georgia, a secluded wooded retreat accessible only by boat, was orchestrated with utmost secrecy. The ceremony took place under flickering candlelight in the island's tiny First African Baptist Church, and fewer than 40 guests attended. Such tight-lipped arrangements infuriated press agencies, which had scrambled helicopters and speedboats to no avail, reflecting the couple's determination to preserve at least one life event away from the paparazzi's relentless lens. Following the marriage, the newlyweds settled in a sleek Tribeca loft in Lower Manhattan. They worked to maintain a relatively low profile, with both John Jr. and Carolyn often seen strolling the neighborhood in casual attire. Still, tabloids would capture them in tense moments, such as occasional sidewalk arguments or near brawls with aggressive photographers. Carolyn, described by friends as elegant but shy, struggled with the constant onslaught. Sources close to her told the New York Observer that she found the perpetual intrusion stressful. At the same time, her refined sense of fashion turned her into something of a style icon in her own right, with magazines like Vogue noting her minimalist yet effortlessly chic wardrobe. The couple represented a new brand of the Kennedys, fully immersed in New York's cultural and media spheres rather than the more traditional and sometimes insular enclaves of Massachusetts politics. Yet for all their attempts at normalcy, the question of a political future loomed. Could he truly resist the call of elective office when that path seemed to be his birthright? Those who knew him intimately suggested he was torn between forging an independent legacy and fulfilling the family expectation of public service. Mentors like Senator Ted Kennedy reportedly offered gentle encouragement, recognizing that John Jr.'s star power could help keep the Kennedy flame alive in national politics, just as President Clinton's personal tributes to John Jr. reflected a level of respect that few private citizens command. But John Jr. remained circumspect. Interviews from the late 1990s in George hinted that he found politics inspiring, but also disillusioning. He expressed frustration with the media's adversarial tone in covering campaigns, a problem he knew all too well from personal experience. Tragically, these speculations about his future were abruptly cut short on July 16, 1999, when the Piper Saratoga he was piloting went missing over the waters near Martha's Vineyard. Carolyn and her older sister Lauren Bissett were on board as well. Overnight, the nation was glued to television broadcasts and online updates. This was among the first major news events to unfold in real time on the burgeoning World Wide Web. The New York Times and CNN provided around-the-clock coverage, while families across America prayed for a miraculous outcome. But the wreckage, along with the bodies of John Jr., Carolyn, and Lauren, was discovered days later on the ocean floor. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, concluded that the crash likely resulted from spatial disorientation. Low visibility and John Jr.'s relatively limited experience flying in such conditions, he had logged roughly 300 hours of flight time, were cited as key factors. Investigations found no mechanical issues with the aircraft, emphasizing the tragic reality that a momentary lapse in piloting judgment had cost 3 lives. Almost immediately, tributes poured in from around the world. President Bill Clinton eulogized John Jr. as a shining light gone out far too soon. Media outlets ran special editions. People magazine, which had crowned him sexiest man alive a decade earlier, devoted entire pages to commemorating his short but impactful life. The scale of the collective mourning resembled the passing of a national figure, yet John Jr. held no official office. His net worth, which some estimates pegged between $30 and $100 million, remained largely tied up in family trusts, real estate investments, including his Tribeca residence, and partial stakes in the Kennedy family's extensive portfolio. The estate settlement, as reported in the Wall Street Journal, indicated that his holdings were enough to ensure a lifetime of comfort. However, it also underscored how deeply entwined he was in the same financial tapestry Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. had begun weaving decades earlier, thereby exemplifying the old money security that he inherited but never flaunted, inside the old money fashion style of the Kennedys. No one defined this shift toward a global awareness of Kennedy style more powerfully than Jackie Kennedy, whose role as First Lady in the early 1960s vaulted her onto an international stage. By 1961, the New York Times was already calling her look a breath of fresh air, describing how her blend of Ivy League preppiness and European haute couture felt at once youthful and timeless. In fact, if you flip through archival issues of Life magazine from the early 1960s, you'll find page after page of Jackie stepping off planes in impeccably tailored suits, greeting dignitaries in sculpted dresses, or posing with her children in ensembles that balanced formality with maternal warmth. Behind the scenes, her style was shaped by a handful of key influences, most famously the French houses Chanel and Givenchy, which epitomized sophistication, and Oleg Cassini, the couturier responsible for many of her White House-era gowns. But there's a fascinating footnote here. Jackie's love for pearls was often more practical than people realized. While the public envisioned her with access to endless heirloom jewelry, certain historians, such as those interviewed in a PBS documentary about the Kennedy White House years, assert that at least some of Jackie's pearl sets were faux creations by Kenneth J. Lane. Lane himself was known for crafting high-quality costume jewelry beloved by socialites who wanted the look of priceless pearls without the risk or expense of wearing real ones every day. It's a detail that underscores Jackie's genius for mixing. She could pair a Chanel suit worth thousands with a set of faux pearls, and the result still read as authentically luxurious because everything was chosen with an exacting eye. Jackie's mastery of image came into stark relief in November 1963 when she wore her now infamous pink Chanel suit on a visit to Dallas, a suit that still to this day stirs deep national emotions. Splattered with blood after JFK's assassination, that garment was quietly taken into storage and remains, by request of her daughter Caroline, off limits to public view until at least 2103. Multiple news outlets, including People magazine and the Washington Post, have covered the suit's story, highlighting its dual status as a symbol of Jackie's poised glamour and a wrenching reminder of national tragedy. Researchers at the National Archives acknowledge how the garment has almost taken on a sacred quality, every thread a piece of living history. In that sense, Jackie didn't just wear clothes. She wore an evolving story that combined the highs of official state visits with the lows of unimaginable personal loss. Of course, Jackie's style wasn't limited to that single tragic moment or to the pillbox hats and suits. During the White House years, 1961 to 1963, her designated couturier, Oleg Cassini, crafted approximately 300 gowns for her. This level of custom design was unprecedented. The Washington Post reports that Cassini's fees totaled about $150,000 at the time, which inflation calculators now put at over $1.5 million. There's evidence discussed in certain academic papers on the role of fashion in statecraft that Joseph P. Kennedy Sr. himself often underwrote these expenses. Far from frivolous, the investment served as a form of fashion diplomacy. Each gown was engineered to impress foreign leaders, TV audiences, and the American public, showcasing an elevated yet non-arrogant vision of American womanhood. With her shift dresses, slim-cut jackets, and minimal ornaments, perhaps a pair of white gloves or a Hermes scarf, Jackie launched new trends. It's little wonder that designers like Halston later spoke with reverence about how she'd shown that clean lines, bold colors, and sparse details could convey just as much prestige as bejeweled ball gowns. By the time she left the White House, Jackie's name was synonymous with a new brand of modern American chic, what many historians call a turning point from 1950s feminine frills to 1960s structured elegance. Yet the Kennedy flair for fashion predated Jackie. Rose Kennedy, the family matriarch, exemplified what might be described as New England restraint. She was deeply influenced by her Catholic upbringing in Boston, a city steeped in conservative social mores. From the 1940s through the 1960s, local Boston papers, like the Boston Globe, occasionally ran snippets about Rose's personal style. Tweed suits, modest A-line dresses, diamond brooches worn at the collar, and strands of pearls that never appeared ostentatious. High necklines and subdued colors, navy, beige, and gray, formed a palette that reflected her sense of propriety. Bergdorf Goodman in New York was a favorite shopping destination, reflecting her partiality for quality fabrics and careful tailoring. The overall effect was timeless. Even photos of Rose Kennedy from the mid-20th century look distinctly polished and age-proof, lacking the obvious hallmarks of many cyclical fashion trends. It was less about what's new this season and more about what's refined enough to withstand any era. That question underpinned the Kennedys' approach to style, a whisper of quiet confidence that resonates with the idea of old money. Then we have Eunice Kennedy Shriver, a woman who knew that sometimes style needs to accommodate an on-the-go lifestyle. She was perpetually busy, founding the Special Olympics in 1968, spearheading charitable events, and traveling widely to promote inclusion for individuals with intellectual disabilities. Crisp blouses, khaki trousers, and sensible loafers became her go-to look, perfect for darting from a formal meeting to a sports field without missing a beat. This approach extended to her wedding attire. In 1953, Eunice wore a silk taffeta dress by Anne Lowe, an African-American designer whose clientele also included Jacqueline Bouvier, for her wedding to JFK. The Washington Post estimates that Eunice's gown cost $2,000, a considerable sum for that era. Though overshadowed by the more spotlighted gowns of her sister-in-law Jackie, Eunice's dress contributed to an understated bridal trend that championed craftsmanship over gaudy embellishment. The parallel with her philanthropic work is clear. Both had an ethos of integrity, focusing on real substance rather than attention-grabbing theatrics. In exploring these women's wardrobes, we see the shared principle of old money style, impeccable construction, the best fabrics, and designs that transcend immediate fads. A Town & Country feature from 2010 argued that the Kennedys' power lay in making it all look effortless, even if behind the scenes there were tailors, consultants, and occasionally large sums of money paying for each garment. While new money might flaunt conspicuous logos or dripping gold, the Kennedys stayed consistent with what one might call the Anglo-American gentry aesthetic, reminiscent of the British aristocracy. A well-cut coat, a timeless silhouette, quiet colors, subtle but unmistakable elegance. This was especially potent in the United States that prided itself on its egalitarianism. Somehow, by avoiding gaudiness, the Kennedys wore wealth without alienating the middle class. People found them aspirational, not off-putting. This approach to dressing extended into the next generation. Even John F. Kennedy Jr., known commonly as John John, picked up on the family tradition of blending Ivy League staples with minimal fuss. As a young lawyer and magazine publisher in the 1990s Manhattan, JFK Jr. could be seen alternating between Savile Row suits for professional events and laid-back chinos, or J. Crew polos for weekends in Hyannisport. It was the perfect update of the old formula. Show you're serious about your work, but never lose that breezy maritime charm that forms the core of the Kennedy mythos. This aesthetic was, in part, a reflection of the flexible, more casual dress codes that took hold in the 1990s. But it also connected back to the family's East Coast roots and their carefully honed tradition of never appearing overdressed. Similarly, JFK Jr.'s wife, Carolyn Bessette Kennedy, brought a potent kind of minimalism into the fold. Having worked in the fashion industry as a publicist for Calvin Klein, Carolyn had absorbed the 1990s ethos of simplicity that Calvin Klein, Jill Sander, and Helmut Lang were all championing. She favored monochrome palettes, black turtlenecks, clean-lined coats, and high-quality shoes like Manolo Blahniks or delicate strappy heels. A 1998 Vogue article celebrated Carolyn as a new style icon, praising her ability to elevate basics into something glamorous. Indeed, with her sleek blonde hair and understated color choices, Carolyn seemed like a modern reincarnation of the Kennedy brand. Wealthy but never ostentatious, trendy without pandering to obviously showy designers. When paparazzi captured her walking through Manhattan with JFK Jr., the images ended up everywhere: People, Vanity Fair, the New York Daily News. And the consensus was that they embodied a 1990s spin on old money cool, a far cry from the glitz-laden 1980s.